Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim Daf Hey, Zevachim 5, and today's Daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this East Tzara. So the Gemara raises a question, a discussion today that's raised by Reish Lakish. Says the Gemara, Rami Reish Lakish al Me'ohi. That's a highly unusual word in the Talmud. I am not sure if it appears any other place. Says Reish Lakish raised the question while he was on the Ma'ohi. Rashi says while he was lying on his stomach, his face facing the ground. So he raised the question while he was on his stomach, Bei Midrasha, in the base Medrash, Umakshi, and he was bothered by the following. Some say, the Karen Ora says that the Gemara gives us this description of him lying on the ground because it's actually related to the question. But I was also thinking that when you lie on the ground, you're in pain. And even though he's in pain, even though he's struggling, he's still studying Torah. That's giving him the chiyus in life, the energy to sustain his life. So he asked the question. It said in our Mishnah that these are the karbanos that if you have the wrong intent, they're kosher, but you have not fulfilled your obligation. So he says, im ksherim heim, if they are indeed kosher, meaning to say you continue with it, then yiratzu, then they should fulfill your obligation of the sacrifice. Ve'im miratzin, and if they're not going to fulfill their obligation, lama, then we have the question: why are we continuing to bring them if they're not fulfilling their obligation? So that was the question that Reish Lakish asked. So Rabbi Elazar, the Amora, responds. Amor Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, the Amora responds, Matzinu b'ban lachar misa. Now we find a similar thing, that there are some karbanos, there's some sacrifices that are brought after a person dies, shehin ksherin, and we see that it's kosher, ve'imaratzim, but they don't fulfill the obligation. And what's the example Rabbi Elazar brings? It's from the Mishnah in Menachos Daf Daled, which is the story of Good morning, Habs, Boker Tov. This is the story of a woman who is a yoledes, ha'isha she'ivia chatasa umesa. A woman who gives birth has to bring two korbanos, the ola and the chatas. She brings two birds, one's an ola, one's a chatas. But let's say she brought her korban chatas. We're in Hayamad Aleph, around 7 lines from the top. Let's say, and Reish Lakish has asked the question, if the korban is kosher, but it's not maratza, so what's the point of continuing to bring it? So it doesn't do anything. So the Rebbe Elazar's response was, yeah, we have some karbanos that are kosher, but they don't do anything. They don't fulfill your obligation. And the example he gives now is from a yoledis, a woman who gives birth, that she brings her chatas after she dies. She brings her chatas, and then she dies. Yaviu yorshin olasa. The orphans should bring her ola offering, even though, what does the ola do? The ola is doing nothing because she's already dead, so it's not doing anything on her behalf. So ola so mesa, but if she brings the korban ola and then she dies, Boker Tov, Jeff, or 8 lines from the top on 5a, well, yaviu yorshin chatasa. Then they don't bring her chatas because that's exeris the causa that there are 5 types of chatas that die. The way to remember that is Timna, Vit Timna, Vlad Chatas, Temuras Chatas. Oh, anyway, we go through all of them, Chatas and Mesa Bawa. But anyway, this is one of them. This is the Chatas, the sin offering whose owner has died. But by the Ola, even though she has died, we still would bring the Ola. So what's it doing for her? So Amarle, so Reish Lakish says, yeah, my question wasn't about the Ola to you. Modino Chaba Ola. Yeah, I had no problem with the ola because I know the ola is brought after death, and so therefore it makes sense to me why the korban in our Mishnah that will continue to be brought is the ola. My question is about the asham, and the asham is 5 types of ashamos. It's a guilt offering. It's and the lo asila harmisa. So and so my question is about the korban asham, that since it doesn't get brought after death, what's the purpose in why do we know that it's kosher, even if it was shachtat shelo lishma? So my question is not about the ola, which I know is brought after death, but it's about the asham, which the assumption is it's not brought after death. So Rebbe Elazar responds, Amar Lei, he responds to Reish Lakish, Hari machol koscha betzido. Oh yeah, there's a position like you in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Afa Asham. Rabbi Eliezer says the Asham is also not brought. So there's a position like you after that it's not brought. So that the Asham is not kosher. So if the intent was wrong. So Reish Lakish responds to Rabbi Eliezer Amar Zel Shaomer Melav Adam Gadol. This is the you're the person who people say is a great man. Gamina Ana Mishnah Shlema. I want the position the Tanakama. I don't want to just be sidetracked into the minority position of Rabbi Eliezer. I want to say the position of the Tanakama who says that the Asham is okay. That's kosher, but it doesn't fulfill its obligation. But since the Asham is not brought after death, why should it be continue to be brought? So that's what I was wondering about. I said I want the Mishnah Shlema of Atomer Sli Rabbi Eliezer. Elam Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, I'm going to give you the answer. Now, actually, the Gemara had given this answer that Reish Lakish is about to give. The Gemara had given it as the anonymous Gemara back on Daf Beis, on the Beis, but here the Gemara gives it as the answer of Reish Lakish. So this is further support for my theory that these are different psichos to the Masech, the different openings, different versions of who said this. So here the Gemara is recording it as the version of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish's answer is based upon the fact that there's a pasuk. It says, Amar Reish Lakish, Ana Pischal and Avshai. I'll give you my answer. It's also a very unusual phrase. Pischal and Avshai. I'll open up my soul. Motzas Vasecha Tishmar, and the Gemara had said, Hi Nidava. Neder. Why did it refer in the pasuk to it a neder and a dava? And Kiduel. And then the Gemara says, sure, and like we said earlier, that even that though you had the wrong intent, you continue to still bring it as an adava, and you don't deviate from the offering. So that was the answer he gave. Yosef Rabbi Zev Rabbi Yitzchak Barabba V'Yosef Abayi Gabayil V'Yatzvi V'Ka'amri Kashuei L'Reish Lakish Asham. So they said, wait, Reish Lakish is bothered by the Asham to Lo Asi Lachar Misa, that the Asham is not brought after death. So why should you continue to bring it? And he cited this verse about Motzas Vasecha, which is about a neder and a nadava. So if that's the case, but Ema, why wouldn't I just limit what the full effect of that pasuk by saying Haba b'neder and nadava? I see that, yeah, if it would be a voluntary offering like Ola, that you could continue to bring below Lirtzi, and it would not serve your obligation. But Asham, but if it will be an Asham, which is not what the pasuk's referring to, well, I see klal. Maybe it shouldn't be brought at all. Maybe that pasuk's only referring to a neder and a dava. So Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, Reish Lakish mehacha pasach. No, Reish Lakish started with an earlier pasuk. It says V'shachat osa lechatas. Osa lishma kshera. Osa lishma kshera, shalo lishma psula. That it's saying about the chatas that if you brought the sin offering lishma, it will be kosher. But if you didn't have the right intent by the chatas, it will be disqualified. But it's only about the chatas. Ashar kachim shalo lishma ksherin. But all other kachim, including the asham, if they were brought shalo lishma, they're still going to be kosher. Yachol yerotzu. I might think that they fulfill your obligation. And then he goes into the second pasuk. Tamar motzas vasecha. And so the motzas vasecha is really the second half of the verse. The first one is excluding the chatas from it, but including the asham. Gemara says, but still, ema abba b'neder nedava laisi v'lo irtzi. Asham irtzuye nami irtzi. Maybe just the opposite. Maybe if it's brought as a neder and a dava, it does not fulfill your obligation. But if it's brought as an asham, then it's kosher. And actually, even if you have the wrong intent, it fulfills your obligation. Just the opposite of the first approach. So the Gemara says, Amar Baye Asham Demirti Lamatas Amers. No, we're not going to say that the Asham you fulfill your obligation. And the reason why I won't say that is we'll do a Kavachomer from an Ola. From an Ola. Ma Ola She'ena Mechaperes Eina Meratz. Just like the Ola, which does not ever serve as kapara, meaning for a prohibition. We're going to learn tomorrow's daf that Ola has limited kapara for positive commandments for Atzeis, and we'll do a lot of that on Yom Kippur. But just like an Ola offering is not mechaperes for a prohibition, Eina Meratze, and it's not going to be effective. Asham shemechaper, a carbon asham that actually does serve as an atonement for a prohibition, Eino din she'ino maratza, for sure should not be effective. So the Gemara says, no, mala ola shekein kalil. What? You can't prove, you can't reject the kal v'chomer. So from an ola, because you can't learn a kal v'chomer from an ola, because an ola is has the unique feature that it's kalil, that it's entirely burnt. And so therefore you can't learn a kal v'chomer from an ola to a shlomim, because an ola might be more chomer than asham. So the Gemara says, well, shlomim yochichu. Okay, we'll prove it from a carbon shlomim. So meaning to say that the shlomim is not mechaper and it is not meratza. So for sure, something that is more severe should not be meratza, like the asham. And Gemara says, no, ma'al shlomim shekein tu'unin nesachan tenufas chazav v'shok. No, the shlomim also has more severe laws than the asham in that it requires smicha, which is the laying of the hands on the animal. Well, it requires, actually, it says here, and I stick to the text of the Gemara and not make up my own text. It says it requires nisachim, certain libations accompanying it, and it requires tenufa chazav v'shok. It requires the waving of the chaza and the shok, the waving of certain parts. So the Gemara says, well, ola tochiach. So go back to the ola. The chaz are din lo rizek rizeh lo rizek rizeh. So it's not a shavash ben shein kachim mishachlan shlosh man ksherim. Both the ola and the shlomim, by comparing the common denominators of them, they're both kachim, and if they slaughter them shlosh man ksherim, and they're not meratza, and they don't fulfill the obligation. Afani avi asham. Okay, I'll also bring the carbon asham, which is also kodesh, v'shachta shlosh mo kosher, and now also say ve'eno meratza. So therefore, that's how we learn out asham. And Gemara says, what? We can't say that because they have a different common denominator. Mal tzara shava shaban, ola and shlomim. You can't learn from that to asham because they're not limited to those commonalities that they're both kachim and shachta shlosh ma. But the ola has another commonality. What is that? Shekein yeshno b'tzibor. It's because the ola and the shlomim are also communal offerings, whereas the asham is not a communal offering. So the Gemara says, okay, instead of learning it only from the ola and the shlomim, we'll learn it from the ola and the toda. The toda is really actually only primarily an individual offering, even though there is a rare exception. Toda yochiach. The Gemara says no. So the Gemara says, nevertheless, we'll learn it from the Toda. The Gemara says, no, you can't. We're on top of Payam Beis. Why? Because Mala Toda Shekain Tuna Lechem. Because the Toda has certain severe laws that it requires the 40 loaves of bread, which no other carbon requires. The Gemara says, O Shlamim Yochichok, so we'll prove it back from the O and the Shlamim. What are the three commonalities that of the Ola, the Shlamim, and the Toda are Shein Kachim, Shachlan Shloshma, Kasher, Ve'enu Maratza. That all three of them, they're Kachim, slaughtered Shloshma, and they're not Maratza. Afani Avi Asham. So I want to say that the carbon Asham also is Kodesh, and if you Shachlan Shloshma, is Kasher, Ve'enu Maratza. Gemara says, no. They have a different commonality between those three carbonos. What's the different commonality? The Ola, the Toda, the Shlamim, they can all come as a voluntary offering. You can bring a voluntary Ola, you can bring a voluntary Toda. Well, generally speaking, there are some times where you're obligated to bring a Toda. And generally speaking, we say it's the 4 people who have to bring a carbon Toda, which is the same law as Birkas Agomel. If they come up from the sea, go through the desert, they're let out of prison and they're released from and they're recovered from an illness, they have to bring this Thanksgiving offering. So, but it can also come as an indava, but an asham cannot. So therefore, what's the reason why we know that the asham is kosher ve'eno meratza? That's basically Reish Lakish's question. Elam Rava. So therefore, Rava is going to say, going back to Reish Lakish's question, Zosa Torah. It says in the pasuk, this is the law of the Ola, the Mincha, the Chatos, the Asham, the Miluim, the Zevach HaShlamim. Ikisha HaKosav Shlamim. The Torah compares the Asham to the Shlamim. Ma Shlamim Shein Kachim U'Shechata and Shelo Shma is Kasher. Just like a So just like, hold on. Hashamim is kosher, and if you slaughter shlo lishma, it's kosher, and does not fulfill the obligation. Also, I'll bring the asham, which is kodesh, and if it's slaughtered shlo lishma, it's still going to be kosher. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second, but that pasuk, which we just mentioned, it doesn't only compare the asham to a shamim, it also compares it to a chatas, which is not effective. Why are you comparing it to a shlamim? Compare it to a chatas. The Gemara says, no, hamiyet rachmana osa. The Torah limited the chatas because it says with the chatas, as we said it says v'shachat osa chatas, as we cited on Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says, well, Yatziv Rav Huna Rav Nachman, Yatziv Rav Sheshes Gabayo. So you have Rav Huna, Rav Nachman, Rav Sheshes. We're sitting with them. V'yasmi v'ka'amri, and they said the following: Kashu Reish Lakish Asham. Wait, your Reish Lakish was bothered by the fact that how could the Asham? Why would the Asham be brought if it doesn't fulfill its obligation? And the reason why he knows it doesn't fulfill its obligation is why would we bother bringing it if it's not brought after death? Rebbe Lazar. Why didn't Rebbe Lazar say Asham Nami Asilacham? He said, well, how does Rish Lakish know that an Asham can't come after death? Maybe if a person was chayav to bring a carbon Asham and then he died and he had separated the animal, his heirs would bring it. Amar Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes responds. So Rav Sheshes responds, no, you can't prove it from the fact that the Asham is you can't prove it from that. Why? Because Asham Amai Karav, because why, if the Asham, yes, you're right, under certain circumstances, it is brought after death. When the owner had separated it and he put it out to graze, and then the animal, the owner separated and then he died, so the animal is grazed, let to graze, and then you bring it, you sell its money for an olah, and then it's brought for what's called a Ketz HaMizbeach. Once it gets a blemish, you sell it for an olah, and it's brought for Ketz HaMizbeach, for like to fill up the altar when the altar is empty. So Rav Shesha says, well, that's the issue. Asham Lamai Karav Limosaro. So your answer was that the Asham is brought after death, but what's it brought for? It's only, you take its money and bring it as an olah. Well, if that's the case, Chatas Nami Mikrav Karba Mosra. Even though we said a Chatas whose owner died is not brought, we don't bring that sin offering. There is a circumstance where the Chatas is also similarly to an Asham in that circumstance where you would sell it and bring its money for an olah. And that would be if a person had separated two animals for a chatas, one to bring, and the second one in case the first one was lost. So then if he brought the first one properly, then the second one just grazes and you bring for its money and olah. So we see from here that a chata, but yet we say a chatas that's brought shalol is psula. So if that's the case, we should say also an asham that's brought with the wrong intent should be disqualified. So the Gemara says, no, but the chatas, there's a pasuk that limits it. Chatas, Afagav the karva mosera, even though the chatas is brought in this manner that you take its money and bring it for an olah, if it's been separated in that manner, nevertheless, miat rachmanahu. The Torah says the word hu by the chatas to tell us chatas hu that if it was slaughtered with the wrong intent, it's not kosher. Gemara says, well, yeah, but you have the same word, the same limiting word by an asham. Asham namik sivehu. So it also says the word hu by an asham. So the Gemara says, no. Hahu la'acher, that who, hahu really, that who is la'acher aktaras emurim hudiksiv. It's written after the parts, the emurim, the innards of the chatas were brought, and it was not said by the shchita and the other avodos of the blood. And so therefore it's not telling us that it's not possible that pasuk is coming to tell us that if you brought the asham shlo shmo, it's not kosher. Aval asham, so aval asham will nemer bahu el achar aktaras amurin muatzmo and molitira amurin kosher. And you don't even need the amurin if the amurin were not brought on it wouldn't be, it would still be kosher. So therefore, it can't be saying that the chatas is that the asham is going to be not kosher if you had the wrong intent. So if that's the case, so what's the purpose of the word who there? Elohu, Emily. Why did it say who by the asham after the emurin? Look at the Rav Huna Marav, the Rav Huna Marav, Asham Shanitek Lariya, that let's say you have a carbon Asham whose owner died, or you used a different Asham to achieve atonement, and then you put the animal out for grazing because until it gets a blemish, and then you sell it and bring for its money in Oah, Ushachato Stam, and then you took this animal back to intent, and you slaughtered it without any intent whatsoever. So then where you had separated for an Olah, it's kosher because it's an Olah. But that's only where it was nitak, where you had separated it for an olah. Nitak in, well, nitak lo. But if you had not separated it yet and you slaughtered it, then it would not be good because it's still called an asham, and so therefore it would not be effective as an olah, and also you can't bring it as an asham because its owner has died. So Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Amakra, who, which means baba. So yeah, it still remains as an asham. So now the Gemara says, and now we're going to get into like a very, even though this is a highly technical daf, doing limudim from verses, there was a point that I elided over at the very beginning. And what I elided over at the very beginning was we said that Rebbe Lazar has a statement, we find that some korbanos are brought after death, that they're kosher, ve'emaratzin, but they don't serve as they don't fulfill the obligation of that person for that korban. And Rashi says there, ve'emaratzin, she'en kapara l'mesim, because the person has died, and you can't achieve atonement for them after their death. So therefore, but we still know they're brought. That's the korban's brought after their death. So we see from here, Rashi saying that there's no kapara after death. There's no atonement after death. Really? What about the fact that we say we give charity for the one who's dead, and we give Yizkor prayers, we say the Kaddish, we say Rahman al-Tzon, you say Hareini kaparas mishkavo, I will be an atonement for his, after his death. So we do. There is. So since we have these contradictory sources that say that there is atonement after death, that it must be that either you cannot effectuate atonement through a korban after death, limiting it to that, or maybe it's not complete atonement, but it is this complicated factor whether or not you could achieve atonement. Maybe you could achieve a merit after death, but you can't achieve an atonement. So anyways, the Gemara goes into that now. Yosef Rav Nachman Rav Sheshas v'Yosef Rav Ada Bar Gabayu v'Yosef Ka'amri Hada Ka'amar Rabbi Elazar Matzinu bebayin la'achar misa shein ksherin ve'imaratzin. This thing which Rabbi Elazar says that we find that you have things that are brought after death and they do work. Le'malei, why wouldn't Reish Lakish say that, no, don't bring me a proof when Rabbi Elazar brought the proof that there are certain karbanos that are brought after death and they do serve, and even though they don't serve any purpose? Why doesn't Reish Lakish say, Hanunami Laisubuirtu? No, those karbanos are effective. They are effective. They do serve as an atonement. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Amar Rav Ada Bar Masna. Really? If a woman, Rahman al-Tzon, dies and she hasn't brought her Olah and the heirs bring the Olah, how are they helping that woman? The woman is dead. Yoledes imhi yalda b'nei miyaldu. Meaning to say why they're bringing it. What is it doing for them? They didn't give birth. The children didn't give birth. So how does that effective for the children? How do you say that korban is effective? So maskefo Ravasi uman leimalon diko kama sega ba'lo miskapra. No. Meaning to say, what would you say that when this woman brings the Olah, it's only she's bringing the Olah, and if she has other reasons why she would need to bring an Olah, that the Olah for giving birth doesn't also spread its wings and spiritually fall onto those other offerings. Since if she brought the Olah, it would serve as an atonement for other reasons why she would need to bring an Olah. So to her heirs, even though they didn't give birth, if they bring her Olah, it would serve to help them out. So we see that they should be bringing that, even though you bring it after death. It's not useless. It's helping the heirs. So now the Gemara is going to bring into another question whether or not somebody who inherits a korban has really acquired it or not. And that's a very deep question. And that's the question really is, to what extent the next generation can effectuate a tikkun or repair for the actions of the earlier generation. It's going to get us a little bit far afield, so we'll stop the discussion here, and God will pick it up and for the daf for Shabbos. But I want to say to